All right, guys, this week we're going to actually talk about weathering and erosion. And the biggest thing you have to understand between the two of them, weathering is like a hammer or a jackhammer. So the idea it's actually breaking the rock down. It doesn't go anywhere. It's like when you drop something on the floor and you walk away, it stays there until somebody else comes back and picks it up. So weathering is the act of actually breaking it down. Nothing more than that, just breaking it down. And then erosion is like the dump truck or the pan and the broom. So how you clean up afterward and you take it and you move it. So weathering is the breaking down, erosion is the actual movement of the rock. Okay, so today's lesson is going to actually have to teach you how this is how paper beats rock. All right, so looking at weathering. Weathering itself is the process of breaking down a rock into smaller and smaller pieces. So over time, like you just learned about with ecological succession, over time, rocks will break down. Now, part of the lesson last week is about how lichens help speed the process up. And some of you answered weathering, and that's totally correct. But we were looking for lichens and moss because they totally speed it up. It's like putting it on fast forward times two. Okay, but weathering will slowly, gradually break the rock down into smaller and smaller pieces. So I know sixth grade talks about how it goes from a rock into rocky sediment, into smaller rocks, and then finally into sand. And so that's actually what we're looking at here. Weathering is broken up into several different pieces. So the three types of weathering, the first one we're looking at is the physical or mechanical type of weathering. It's usually dealing in wind and water. So if you look at these pictures down here, this is a picture of how we have a windscape, how it slowly weathered that rock away. This one right here, this beautiful archway, is actually through wind erosion as well. Up here, usually your smoother rocks are usually going to be found with your water. Wind constantly abrades rock with other sand particles is how that erosion takes place and how the weathering takes place. With water, it's just a slow movement over a long period of time. Water runs over it, so that's how we get these really smooth rocks. And then this behemoth right here, this giant rock with this crazy split right down the middle that looks like He-Man or Thor like beat it to death, that's actually formed from ice. So what happens is water starts to creak into these little crevices and it'll freeze. And then you know the ice, when water freezes, ice actually expands. That's why when we put ice in a cup and we pour a drink in it, it never overflows as the water melts because it just took up the same amount of space. Well, with this rock, that water goes in there and it freezes and it actually pushes that rock farther and farther apart. We call that ice wedging. The second type of weathering is called biological weathering. Biological weathering means that any kind of living organism, whether it be a tree, an ant, an insect, an animal, humans, anything that's living, that it causes a rock to split, that would be a type of biological weathering. So a tree, so if you see right down here in this left-hand corner, this tree has actually found the biggest adversity in life and it has actually grown and it's grown through that rock. It's actually caused that ginormous crack right there. It actually caused that crack in order to survive. It overcame that giant rock. Here you'll see these cracks right here, the same thing. So there's trees up here, and those roots grow down and they start cracking it through. See how this tree right here is actually growing out of the side of the rock? That is biological weathering. It will eventually break that rock down. That tree is going to prove stronger than that rock. Okay, here is just a normal picture of us human beings doing what we do best, ruining the world, one particle of dust at a time. Then even animals when they burrow into the ground, that is actually a type of biological weathering because they are disrupting the ground and they're creating that hole. It can actually be determined as biological weathering. And then the lichen, which you should know from last week. Yes, it's pronounced lichen. It's that weird word that you didn't know. This is lichen on a rock, so it's actually sitting on that rock and it actually produces acid that starts to break it down. Now, because it's lichen, because it's living, it does fall under biological weathering as well as chemical weathering. Just a thought to make sure you knew that. So once you have weathering happen, it breaks it down into sediment. Sediment is a word that you're required to know. So sediment is that idea of taking this big rock and then it slowly falls apart into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces until it gets to the very bottom. Now, Once it starts breaking down and it gets that fine particle, wind will pick up that fine particle. So that's actually why you always see just big rocks left behind, because all that sand, all that smaller sediment that's lighter can get picked up by the water or by the wind, and it can get moved along through erosion. Which brings us to erosion. Erosion is the actual act of moving that sediment from one place to the other. So it's like that dump truck. It's actually going to take it and it's going to move it. Now we talk about agents of erosion, and these are some of those pictures. So see here, we've actually, what happens especially is we'll have like a large piece break off and it will traverse down the river. Notice that we have little pieces like this, they'll actually start falling apart, and that's how you have the shaping moving along the sides as well. This is usually caused during like a flash flood or something like that. You'll see all this water immediately rapidly moving along the ground, and because it's rapidly moving, it kicks up any larger pieces of rock, larger pieces of sediment, and it takes it along with it, almost acting as like a gouging implement to pick up even more and more sediment. So the more faster the water moves, that's why you see it all dirty and gross. Have you ever been to like Galveston Beach? Have you ever seen pictures overhead of Galveston Beach? Right there at the shore, it's always kind of dark and cloudy and gray, kind of ugly water. Whereas you go and look farther out, it's actually blue and clear, just like the waters near the Florida Panhandle and things like that. Because the mighty Mississippi exits right there near Galveston and near Louisiana. That's why that Gulf of Mexico right there is so dark and grayish looking, because it's so muddy, because it's actually all that sediment's getting kicked up because all that water is rapidly moving out of there. And so it kicks up all the sand. Every once in a while you can go to Galveston and actually see really clear blue water, but it really is kind of a once in a lifetime situation. I'm 38 and I've seen it once. Um, so these are just pictures of erosion. Sand lifting up a sandstorm is considered erosion because it does pick up that fine sand and it moves it along. So what we were talking about, the agents or the causes of erosion. So when we talk about agents, there are four agents of erosion. There is wind. So always remember that wind blows. So wind is an agent of erosion. You have water that flows. So this is another picture of one of those flash floods that I kind of wanted to get you an idea, because I don't think you always, I think you know about a river. Naturally, the water flows, naturally picks up river rock, and that's why it's so smooth. But something that you may not always think about, and as we lead farther and farther into our lessons, we're going to get closer and closer to catastrophic events. And this is all kind of leading to it, because you have to recognize not only is the impact on humans, but it's also on nature and the environment. And so as this water comes through so rapidly, it picks everything up with it and it takes it with it and it causes damage along the way. So water is an agent of erosion. Gravity always acts no matter what, whether you see it or not. So a rock slide is gravity. It didn't have to be water. It doesn't have to be a mudslide. It can be a landslide. It can be a rock slide. So eventually, just over all the years of that water sinking into crevices and wind beating at it, eventually one portion of a piece of rock can just get weak and gravity acts upon it and it literally falls down, and that's how we end up with these giant rock falls. Driving higher up north of San Antonio, you always watch for boulders on the road, because they recognize that gravity can act at any moment. And then something that you may have learned last week with ecological succession is the glaciers. When those glaciers melt away, that's what you saw last week. Well, this one, glaciers actually move. They move really slowly, like slower than the sloth in Zootopia, okay? So this glacier is moving, and as it moves, it actually picks up that rock and it scrapes it. I almost think of like nails in the chalkboard scraping, but that ice will actually slowly move, and it causes gouges in the dirt because it picks up pieces and it moves it slowly along with it. Or as gravity acts upon that glacier and the heat melts the ice and it goes crashing into the ocean right here. As it crashes, it takes with it more sediment, because you can see the sediment right here. As that glacier is slowly melting, it will pull it down. So as that ice falls, it will scrape the side and it will take chunks of rock with it. Um, so I know in last week's ecological succession, it talked about glaciers retreating, and that's true. But this week we're talking about just ice in general as it moves. Glaciers move, and when they move the rock underneath them as well. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I have for you this week. I did end up putting the two student reviews into your Smarts just to review this information. If you don't get 3 stars because it's asking you questions throughout and you don't get 3 stars, keep trying. This information is important. You're going to keep seeing it now as we go farther and farther along. Um, I hope you're doing well. I also put in EduSmart an activity just so that you can see how water does slowly chemically melt like limestone and different rocks that we know. It's one of those interactivities. So make sure you do that as well. I miss you guys and I hope you're taking care of yourselves. Bye.